He coached Little League, threw the best block parties on the street. His neighbors said he was the kind of guy who'd shovel your driveway before you even woke up. Didn't ask. Didn't expect anything back. Just did it. He was also one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. And here's the thing that keeps behavioral analysts up at night. It's not that nobody suspected him. It's that when they finally found out, almost nobody was surprised that he had done it. They were surprised that they had never seen it coming. That gap between who someone appears to be and what they actually are, that's what we're getting into today. Because the question isn't just how someone like that hides in plain sight. The question is, why are we built to let them? After almost every high-profile arrest, reporters go to the neighborhood, and almost every time, you hear some version of the same sentence. He seemed so normal. He was the last person I would have suspected. I just can't believe it. Now, you could write that off as shock, grief, the brain protecting itself from something it doesn't want to process. But it's not just shock. Researchers who have studied neighbor and co-worker testimony after serial killer arrests found that the nice guy description comes up with remarkable consistency across cultures, across decades, across wildly different types of offenders. So the question isn't whether the mask exists. The question is, how is it so good? And here's where most true crime coverage stops. It says, he fooled everyone, and moves on to the next detail. We're not doing that, because the mask isn't something they put on. It's something they built, deliberately, methodically, over years, because it worked. And understanding how it's built is the only way to understand why it's so hard to see through. There are 3 psychological mechanisms at the core of this, and they don't operate in isolation. They stack. Each one makes the next one more effective. Let's start with the first one. Compartmentalization. The human brain has a remarkable capacity to wall off contradictory information. In healthy psychology, it's actually adaptive. It's how surgeons go home and have dinner after a hard day. It's how soldiers function under fire. You separate what you're doing from what you're feeling, because collapsing those two things would make you less effective. But in certain personality structures, particularly those with antisocial or narcissistic traits, compartmentalization doesn't just manage stress. It creates rooms, completely separate rooms that never communicate with each other. Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, is the cleanest example of this I've ever come across. For over 30 years, Rader was simultaneously a church president, a Boy Scout leader, a compliance officer for the city of Park City, Kansas, a man whose literal job was enforcing municipal code, a husband, a father, and an active serial killer. Not sequentially, not before he became a family man. At the same time. And what forensic psychologists found when they studied his journals and interviewed him extensively after his arrest wasn't someone who was tormented by the contradiction. It was someone who didn't connect the rooms. He didn't struggle with who he was, one investigator noted. He just kept the filing cabinet organized. That should bother you more than the crimes themselves, because it means there was no internal war, no crack to find, just a very tidy mind. The second mechanism is something researchers call social mimicry, and it's where it gets genuinely disturbing. Most people assume that charm is something you have, a natural quality, warmth that radiates outward. But for a specific profile of offender, what psychologists broadly categorize as dark triad personalities, which combines narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, charm isn't something they feel. It's something they reverse engineer. They watch, they study, they identify what you respond to, what makes you feel seen, what makes you lower your guard, and then they give you exactly that. Ted Bundy is the textbook case. While he was actively committing crimes, Bundy volunteered at a suicide prevention hotline in Seattle. He answered calls from people in crisis. His supervisor, Ann Rule, who would later write one of the definitive books about him, described him as kind, compassionate, and genuinely gifted at connecting with people in pain. She meant it. She believed it. She wrote him letters of support after his arrest. Here's what makes this so hard to process. Bundy wasn't performing empathy. He was studying it. He watched how empathetic people behaved, what they said, how they made someone feel heard, and he replicated it with precision. Not because he felt it, because it was useful. The difference between real empathy and performed empathy is almost impossible to detect in the moment, because the behavioral output is identical. That's why people described him as genuinely warm, because as far as they could tell, he was. The third mechanism isn't about the killer at all. It's about us. There's a well-documented cognitive bias in psychology called the halo effect. The basic principle is this. Once we've categorized someone as good in one dimension, we unconsciously extend that goodness to every other dimension. He's a good neighbor. He's probably a good person. He's involved in the community. He probably has good values. He's friendly to your kids. He's probably trustworthy. None of those logical leaps are justified, but our brains make them automatically because it reduces cognitive load. We can't carefully evaluate every person we interact with from scratch every day. We build a mental shortcut, a profile, and we update it reluctantly. John Wayne Gacy understood this intuitively, whether he could have named it or not. Gacy threw annual block parties for his neighborhood in Norwood Park Township, Illinois. He worked as a contractor. He was active in the local Democratic Party. He performed as a clown at children's hospitals. In 1978, he was photographed shaking hands with First Lady Rosalind Carter at a Democratic fundraiser. There were 33 bodies under his house and in the crawl space when he was arrested, but none of his neighbors saw it. Not one, because his good neighbor profile was so established, so consistent, so reinforced over years that when small inconsistencies appeared, the brain filtered them out. That's not stupidity. That's the halo effect doing exactly what it's designed to do. The problem is that it was being deliberately triggered. 3 mechanisms: compartmentalization, social mimicry, the halo effect. The first one means there's nothing leaking from the inside. The second one means they know exactly what to show you. The third one means your brain is helping them maintain the illusion. Now let's look at what happens when it starts to crack. Chris Watts, 2018, Colorado. His pregnant wife, Shanann, and their 2 young daughters went missing. Within hours, Watts was on the front lawn giving a tearful interview to local news, pleading for his family's safe return, voice breaking, wiping his eyes. The interview was broadcast nationally. He had murdered them all himself, less than 12 hours before. What's remarkable about the Watts case from a behavioral standpoint isn't the crime, it's the mask failure, because investigators watching that interview in real time flagged it. Not the tears. The tears were convincing enough. It was the timing of the tears, the micro-expressions between sentences, the way his affect shifted when the questions changed direction. Former FBI behavioral analyst Mary Ellen O'Toole reviewed the footage and noted the absence of something specific: congruent grief. Real grief is disorganized. It doesn't hit on cue, recover on cue, and perform on cue. Watts's grief was structured. It had a shape. Within 48 hours, he confessed. The mask didn't fail because he was careless. It failed because under that level of pressure, with cameras, investigators, neighbors watching, The compartmentalization couldn't hold the load. The rooms started talking to each other, and that's the tell. Here's the thing that most true crime content won't tell you, because it's less cinematic than the crime itself. Behavioral analysts don't look for the monster. The monster is invisible by design. That's the whole point. What they look for are inconsistencies, small behavioral signals, sometimes called leakage in forensic psychology, that slip through the mask at the edges, not because the person is sloppy, but because maintaining a false identity is cognitively expensive, and over time, under stress, it costs more than the brain can perfectly manage. Some of what they look for: overcorrection. The person who is too helpful, too present in the community, too eager to be liked. Genuine social investment has natural limits. It ebbs and flows based on mood, energy, circumstance. Performed social investment doesn't. It stays suspiciously consistent because it's being managed, not felt. Absence of reciprocity. Charm without emotional investment. The person who is wonderful to be around but never actually needs anything from you. Never asks for help. Never shows vulnerability. Relationships, real ones, are reciprocal. They have weight in both directions. The mask doesn't ask for weight back because real closeness would require real exposure. Compartmentalized reactions. The person who responds to bad news in a way that's slightly off. Not too little emotion, not too much, but calibrated in a way that real emotion never quite is. Real people are messy. Real grief leaks into anger. Real fear bleeds into humor. Real emotion doesn't hit its mark and hold. The mask is almost perfect. Almost. What gives it away isn't what they do, it's what they never do. Here's where I'm going to leave you. Think about someone you know right now who fits the profile I've described tonight. Not a killer, just someone who's almost too good at being liked. Who's always exactly what the room needs them to be, who you've never really seen rattled, who you know the surface of, but when you try to think of a moment where they were genuinely unguarded, you come up empty. Most of those people are fine. Most of them are just private, or emotionally guarded, or excellent at social performance in ways that are completely benign. But the fact that you can't tell the difference, the fact that the profile and the performance are functionally identical, that's not a flaw in your perception. That's the design. We always ask what they did. Every true crime headline, every documentary, every podcast episode. What happened? What did they do? What were the crimes? This channel asks, why? And the answer, almost every time, is hiding in plain sight. In the psychology, in the behavioral patterns, in the mechanics of the mask. Because monsters don't look like monsters. They look like the nice guy next door. If you want to keep pulling on that thread, subscribe. We're just getting started.